Okay. It's not a very hot take. It's probably lukewarm at best, but I actually think that Baker Mayfield will lead the Panthers into a wild card berth. I like
Mm.
what he's done in the playoffs. I think the offensive weapons are are a little bit better than what he's used to, and the Browns organization is a dumpster fire. I think we can all agree with.
Mm.
I think that defense is young, up and coming, and Matt Rule, made what Sam Darnold looked decent for 7 games, and I think Baker Mayfield has a lot more experience and he can get hot quick, and I think that he can surprise some people. And the NFC is very weak. I think their division is okay. Thanks, Andrew. I think their division is a little underrated, but I think that Baker Mayfield could lead them to a wild card.
Oh, okay. That one is really hot. I
I would
think the
agree. I think
Panthers.
it's a good hot take. I like that though.
I think the Panthers are closer to picking number one than they are to a playoff berth. But
You know what? I
I
would
mean,
agree with you if it wasn't for Sam Darnold, but I think that this team has a little bit more moxie than what people realize. And I mean, I think that they're in the same category as Detroit. They're going to be very tough and scrappy, and the NFC again is really weak. And anything can go. I think if they can get to 8 or 9 wins, they can probably sneak into a wild card because that's how weak I think this NFC conference is. So
See, I think it's a good for the last point that you just made is that I think the NFC conference is weaker.
mhm.
Like I think there'll be teams like I think the Saints will get in. I know I don't think they're the best roster out there. The defense is good, but I think if Baker comes out and he's really pissed off, he was the number one overall pick for a reason. I mean,
Right.
there is something there. He did have a good season with Cleveland before things fell apart. And as to your point, I don't think Cleveland's necessarily some sort of shining, in capsule of what a good franchise looks like.
Right.
I don't know if it'll happen. I think I believe I
Yeah.
tweeted out that the Panthers are like the definition of mid in my mind for the.
Yeah.
But the thing is that if Baker plays well and some of the outside weapons like DJ Moore is nice, they have Laviska Shenault, they have Robbie
Mhm.
Anderson. If Christian McCaffrey's healthy, I think the defense is solid. There could be something there that
Yeah.
materializes.
my issue with the Panthers is I hate Matt Rule, to be
I do
completely
not like
honest.
Matt Rule either,
Yeah.
but
This is not an advocacy for him at all. This is just, I think that they have a lot of quality parts, and I think they can get real lucky and put it all together. I mean, Matt Nagy had a winning season with Mitch Trubisky in Chicago in the NFC, so I don't see why Matt Rule or Baker Mayfield can't have a decent season together. And Baker I think is a better quality quarterback than Sam Darnold,
I would
even
agree.
though, let's see, what did Andrew say? Is the truth in the light? Yeah, no USC quarterback has been that great since Carson Palmer. So no.
That is true.
Well, the other thing about the Panthers, which you didn't even offer, and I don't think they're going to be a playoff team, but I have to say, they could easily sneak 4 wins out of their division. I
Yeah.
mean, they'll probably end up with 3 because they
Mm-hmm.
could beat the Falcons twice. They could easily split with the Saints, if not sweep the Saints. They're not going to beat any games against Tampa, but
Right.
they could at least get
Well,
4 wins out
well,
of
hold
there.
on. Maybe one game against Tampa and I said this on our show when we did the NFC South prediction, but Tampa loses these weird games like towards the end of the season. It's like one of those they've clinched the playoffs and they're not really starting anybody, and then they'll lose one random game. So I can see like the Panthers maybe sneaking one in, but I don't know about a complete sweep. That's just because sweeping your division, you'd have to be like the Chicago Bears to be that terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe Tom Brady has to have another round of plastic surgery and he misses a week and they get a game in there. Who knows? A lot of
Yeah,
things can happen.
for sure.
All right, Clark, what's your hot take?
All right, so my hot take is actually going to travel to a different world than we normally ever truthfully discuss, but it needs to be talked about because I don't know if you guys have been paying much attention, but right now going on currently is the U.S. Open for tennis. Big tennis family over here in the Farrenthal household. ATP tennis is on usually no matter what during the week at some point. And certainly the U.S. Open is on into the late nights. If anyone who doesn't know, this will be Serena Williams' last tournament ever playing. And I think for me, I've held on to this for a little bit. It's not my biggest one today, but it needs to be recognized for what she is. In my opinion, Serena Williams is the most dominant athlete in modern U.S. sports history.
100%.
I don't think it's much of a discussion in my mind. If you look at the accolades of what she's accomplished, 23 Grand Slam titles, absolutely massive. 14 doubles titles, Grand Slams. She's a 7-time WTA Player of the Year. Along with that, she has 4 Olympic medals. And I think perhaps even bigger than tennis itself is what she has done for women in tennis specifically. Her and her sister Venus have elevated women to being able to get equal pay, which is absolutely massive and should be talked about for as long as tennis goes on as a sport. Not only that, Serena, as well as a minority African-American woman, has raised and elevated and opened up the game to so many more people and so many more different parts of America that probably would not have paid attention to tennis had it not been for her and her sister. I think when people look back, if this is her last tournament, if she decides to come back, whether or not, Serena Williams has been dominant for the better part of 2 decades. When she was at the top of her game, there was simply no one that could match the power, the finesse, the speed. What she brought to the court was simply electric. No one, I think, will ever be able to match it. It's something that you'll never really see. And two, like, again, her style of play, there's a reason women serve so much harder. It's because they try to model Serena's game. She's brought so much more power to what was really at some point more of a finesse feel, I feel like, in women's tennis. So overall, she's a GOAT of tennis, in my opinion, too. She is the GOAT of all sports. She is the single most dominant athlete the world has ever seen in her sport, respectively, and overall in any measure. She deserves everything she gets, and I wish her the best for bringing so much to sport, to women, for everything she's done. If this is truly her final go about, I hope she go ahead and wins that last title for herself. It'd be the best way for it to go out.
100% agree. No disagreement, no counter. I would say Serena Williams is the reason why women's tennis is so popular today.
Mm-hmm.
If it wasn't for her, it would still just be nothing more than another sport that women play and no one acknowledges. But Serena Williams is tennis sports. I think she's the face of female sports, to be honest with you. So
I would agree for sure. I mean, I would say the only other person who I considered maybe more dominant overall, I put Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods' runs in the early 2000s were like nothing people had seen before, particularly in golf. But I felt like Serena, in terms of what she's done basically for the last 15, 20 years, has just been something that I truthfully haven't seen.
Yeah, and probably won't ever see again, which is the scarier thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's just so dominant, and I mean, she made women's tennis what it is and why people watch it.
She's certainly a huge reason as to why it's continued to grow in popularity and stuff. I mean, now Steffi Graf was certainly really big and Margaret Court, but what the Williams sisters, specifically Serena and her sister Venus, should get a ton of credit too, because Venus fought so much for equality on payment for purses and wins. Mm-hmm. But both of them have been immeasurable in terms of what they've done for the sport. But Serena, her dominance is just, I don't think you'll ever see it again in an athlete.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, I agree. That sounds good to me, Clark.
Well, there you go.
But what about LeBron?
Man, you know, there's a lot of good conversations you can have. I think LeBron, to me, I think LeBron's the GOAT of basketball. I know people certainly disagree on that.
Mm-hmm. I would be the one. I would be one of them.
I'm sure you would. And I totally understand the argument. I really do. Jordan's 6-for-6 titles is certainly something immeasurable. But I still think I would take Serena overall. I think LeBron James would actually maybe tell you Serena himself too.
Probably. And I'm not saying that LeBron isn't, you know, and again, we're talking about something completely different, but I would say, I'd agree with you. LeBron, Michael, they would all say Serena is probably the greatest female athlete or athlete to represent sports. And I'd agree with that. But, you know, there's no one that's kind of closer. I mean, you want to argue her sister Venus, maybe, and some other players before her, but Venus is tennis, Serena is tennis. When you think of women's tennis or tennis in general, she's like the face of that sport. Whereas the NBA has several different faces and icons that kind of recognize. Just seems like for the last 20 years, it seems like Serena is tennis. Like, you can't say tennis without including her in the same sentence.
Yeah, I mean, I think a really big showing point too of maybe her impact in the sport is if you just look up US Open tickets right now, they're at their highest that they've ever been. Mm-hmm. I mean, people are paying thousands of dollars to sit up in the bleachers, very high hard points of there in the Queens, New York, just to watch her play. So every celebrity's there too. Everyone's there. So
yeah, witnessing greatness.
Mm-hmm.
No, sounds good.
Ethan,
all right, I'll go into my hot take. So I'll preface it. My hot take is one I've been thinking of the wording on for a long time. I've been trying to think of how I did this. And I will say it has to do with the Chargers, but it has to do with a legacy player of the Chargers. And I always try to think of ways that, like, a lot of my hot takes, I want to talk about how I think the NFL is changing So like one was I thought the linebacker position is going to cease to exist pretty soon in the way that we know it today.
Mm-hmm.
And so mine this week, my hot take is that I think Ladainian Tomlinson is the modern makeup of what the NFL back is today. I think Ladainian Tomlinson is the role model in which teams decided this is the way the back's got to go. Of your hard, elusive runner with a lot of agility who can catch the ball out of the backfield, who can pass protect, and if you need him to, can be a part of gadget plays. I think LT showed the league just how important it is to have that kind of dual threat option in a main 3-down back. Even though Ladainian Tomlinson had great players behind him and Michael Thomas and Darren Sproles, he was still able to be on the field all 3 downs and was very effective in the passing game. In fact, many people would argue he was probably a better pass catcher than he was running with the rock, which I disagree with. But I just think when I look at it, LT is that modern running back. I can't think of another running back. Barry Sanders, absolutely electric runner, but just wasn't the kind of pass catcher he was. Another player I would argue that helped fit this mold would be after LT and Jamal Charles. I think Jamal Charles also pushed the league in this new makeup of where we see running backs who have to be able to pass protect, have to be on the field all 3 downs, and have to catch the ball. I just think LT really opened up the floodgates to just, you can have a dude who scored 30 plus touchdowns in a season and just absolutely dominate your offense and take over games. And he's a dual threat. You can still have Phillip Rivers throw the ball. You can still have good receivers on the outside. You don't need a crazy good offensive line for a player like that, to where it just opened the floodgates to now we see players like Jonathan Taylor. We see players like Nick Chubb. All of these guys are kind of in that makeup of elusive runners who are able to catch the ball out of the backfield. So when I really lined it up, I think LT is that marker, that benchmark in which the NFL decided to change and pivot away from the Sean Alexander type players who the season before had 28 rushing touchdowns to this more LT style of runner.
I agree. I agree totally. I think, sorry to interrupt. My bad on that. But I think I totally agree. I mean, I obviously watched the Chargers because they were here in San Diego. Not as big of a fan as you are, but LT, no matter what, I think you think about as one of the all-time greats at running back. But again, as you pointed out, his ability to catch and run the falls, everything. Any GM right now, if they're like, can you have one running back? I think the last 30, 40 years, they would say, give me Ladainian Tomlinson. He's everything that you could possibly ask for in the modern NFL back. And if you thought his numbers were great then, I don't know what the numbers would be like now. They would be astronomical. They would be insane, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And actually a running back that probably was LT before LT was Marshall Faulk when he was with the greatest show on turf, the Rams. He was a really good pass catching running back. The only reason why some teams back then weren't so willing to do it as much as the Rams is because, there was this misnomer that running backs didn't have the hands to catch the ball down the field. And of course, Marshall Faulk proved that wrong. And then LT comes along and just destroys the league. And I think he's one of the few players that's ever had, 100 catches and 1,000 yards rushing. I think it is in NFL history.
Yes.
And in my opinion, I think he's arguably like top whatever number you want to say in terms of running back. Cause what he did in a single season, I think to break the rushing touchdown record is, historic. And I mean, it was broken several different times. And I think he owns 2 of those broken records each time that it was reset. LT, is no doubt an all-time great. And I would agree, like everyone's chasing the next LT. Everyone wants that running back that can maintain 100 plus catches, 1,500 yards rushing, X amount of rushing touchdowns. I mean, that's the prototypical, because to your argument, Ethan, the linebacker that's dying, who's going to cover that running back, So that's just such a dangerous lineup when you set them up on the outside. And then not only can they get breakaway speed when they get the ball, but now they have hands to where you have to keep up with them, and you can't. No one's keeping up with a running back.
For sure.
I wanted to bring also one. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say. So Andrew's question is which running back resembles LT. So I'm gonna give 2 examples, and one didn't work out, and one is just injury prone. I think Christian McCaffrey is probably the closest player to LT style of play, of that quick cut kind of running back who is a super effective pass catcher, can be used in all parts of the field, but just hasn't really been on the field to show it. And then who is drafted to be that kind of player, who I don't think turned into it just because of injuries as well, is Saquon Barkley. I think Saquon Barkley, if he had stayed healthy throughout his first 3 years, I think we could be looking at him in that kind of way, just because of how strong his lower half is, how his contact balance is so good. Plus, he has the hands to be able to do it. I think that's what the Giants were trying to chase. They thought, hey, if we can add an LT type talent into this offense, then it'll just skyrocket. It doesn't matter who's on the back end. And it didn't end up happening. But Clark, what were you going to say?
Yeah, so I was only going to point out another guy which I would have loved to have seen play in this modern NFL. I wish Reggie Bush would have played at the time when they would have known how to use him better.
Yeah.
I think if you would have seen him, if Reggie Bush gets drafted now, I mean, good God, the amount of yards you would go from scrimmage would be insane. He's not, the biggest guy. He had injuries and stuff in New Orleans, but if he was available now, the numbers that he would put up in my mind would be astronomical. Because there was people when he came out of USC, I remember saying, oh, he should go out and play wide receiver instead, which they wouldn't tell him now, and they would figure out a way to scheme him into a spot that it's like someone would use a guy like, McCaffrey himself right now.
I mean, I think Reggie Bush would make a lot of sense in kind of a Deebo Samuel role of kind of where you just run a lot of slants, run a lot of screens, and you put him out on the outside. Plus, then he can get in the backfield. Reggie Bush would be insane.
He would tear it up on any RPO style offense.
Oh,
he'd be almost as big of a threat as the quarterback that's mobile. Imagine him on the same team as Lamar Jackson. That would just be scary in itself. I think Alvin Kamara, though, is a really good duplicate to LT. And he's in my opinion, he's a smoother runner than LT, but again, can catch the ball and can fly, and very LT-esque in my opinion.
Yeah. So that's my hot take of the week. I just think when I stack it up, I think Ladainian Tomlinson is that modern running back of where you're trying to pinpoint when the league kind of transitioned away from your bell cow runners into like this pass catching hybrid. I think LT was what showed the league there's a different way we can do this, and there's a better way we can do this.
Yeah, so teams started to stop having guys like Jerome Bettis and Brandon Jacobs running their backfield.
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah.